So we're back for round 4 of Youngstars karting, and despite it only being the normal 2-week break since the last race, I've done so much in this time. I did my first track day, I passed my ARDS test, and I did a 2-hour race at Rye House with Stefan. But why is this important, you ask? Well, all of the stuff I learnt culminated in what I would say is the best performance I've ever put in at Red Lodge. And I would even consider my second stint the best stint I've ever done at Youngstars. So stay around for that. So when we arrived, we were paired up with Dylan and Jensen. And despite them both being fairly new drivers, they were also both very fast. So we looked like we were on the right track for a good race. However, we did have one major obstacle. A weight penalty, as we're all very light drivers, meaning that we'd almost certainly have a huge weight penalty. But as you'll see later on, huge was a bit of an understatement. So as we went out for quali, I felt even more confident that we would have a good race, as the kart really matched my driving style, with a lot of front grip. And this really showed, as after the first flying lap, I was provisional pole, and aided by yellow flags at turn 1, I held pole all the way until the last lap. But on the last lap, just 20 seconds from the end of the session, we were demoted to P2. While this may not sound too bad on paper, it wasn't really the position that mattered, but more that we were now starting on the outside. So the gap from us to P1 widthways was more than the gap from us to P1 lengthways, if that makes sense, making it almost impossible not to lose a position to P3 on the start. However, I knew this. So when it came time to park on the grid, I angled my car as far left as possible, making it easier to cut in front of P3 without losing too much momentum. And when the start came, it worked. And our plans worked then, as we cut right in front of P3. Now following P1 down to turn 1, is he going to leave a gap? Can we have a look? Down the inside, we can't quite, but we're going to use our front grip to try and get a wider line into the corner without being overtaken. We get a better run out of there, but we're not going to send it down the inside just yet. Not feeling like getting any contact warnings on the first lap. We thought about it though. So we get a decent run out of 180, but remember, we're still on cold tyres. So as we turn into Oak Tree, we get a small wiggle. Now P3 is side by side with us on our inside. He's pushing us wide, and we have to concede the position. We're going to hold it side by side though. Can we pull off the switch back onto the main straight? We're carrying too much speed, and we're not going to be able to get down the inside quick enough to stay in P2. So we drop back down into P3, but we're not going to settle for that, and we will be fighting him for P2, and hopefully afterwards the top step of the podium. But this is where strategy comes in, however, as after a few attempts of trying to get past and a good few minutes of wheel-to-wheel battling, I was pulled in early so that we could try and use our kart's performance to pull off the undercut, and said undercut was looking very possible, as Dylan had been putting in very good pace for his entire stint. And while he didn't actually gain any positions on track, we were on the right track to gain them in the pit lane. But that was the only problem though, the pit lane, as it's where things really began to go downhill. But in order for you to understand this, I need to quickly explain how the pit lane speed limit works. So as we don't have speedos on our karts, there's no way of actually knowing how fast you're going. So instead, the pit lane speed limit is measured in time, precisely 40 seconds. So if it takes you any less than 40 seconds to get between the pit lane entry and your pit box, you'll be slapped with a penalty of, I believe, 20 seconds. But on the flip side, if it takes you any longer than 40 seconds to get down the pit lane, you're losing time. But it's also always better to lose a couple seconds being slower than be a couple seconds faster and get a penalty. But why is this important, you ask? Well, Dylan was a bit slow through the pit lane, which is fine, as it ensures we don't get a penalty, and it only lost us around 10 seconds. A margin we can claw back. What we can't claw back from as easily, however, was the weight penalty we were about to get. It was a whopping 34 seconds due to us as a team being 40 kilos lighter than any other. And as we pitted early, it meant that when Jensen went out for his stint, he was last and 3 laps down. But we weren't prepared to give up. And after Jensen came in at the end of his stint, we had regained the lap, putting us last and only 2 laps down now for my second stint. But where is the footage for the second stint, you may be asking? Well, it turns out that when I came in for the end of my first stint, I didn't properly turn the camera off, meaning I recorded about 10 minutes of cooldown room sealing. This meant that when we got the camera back out for stint 2, it didn't have enough battery necessary to turn on, something we only realised afterwards, once we were looking back over the footage. But I'll try and give you the best vocal representation of what my second stint was like, as I would class it as hands down my best stint that I've ever done at Youngstars. So we started stint 2 off with a very good pit stop, and exited into some clear air. And after doing the fastest lap of the race on just the 3rd lap of my stint, I caught up to some lap traffic. And while lap traffic normally takes a few laps to dispatch, I overtook all 3 cars in the train in front of me within about 4 corners, and then proceeded to use the clear air after them to set another fastest lap, and then another. And I eventually ended up beating my own fastest lap about 4 or 5 times in my stint, consistently within a tenth of it for pretty much every lap though. And after dispatching a few more karts and coming into the pit lane for the end of my stint, we had not only unlapped ourselves twice and got on the lead lap, but we'd undercut P12, meaning we were no longer in last. And as everybody all the way up to P5 were on the same lap, this put us in a much better position, and meant that we could even fight for some good points. A fight that was massively helped by both Dylan and Jensen, as after Dylan had done very good pace consistently in his stint and brought us up to P9, Jensen went out to bring the race home, doing a great overtake near the start of his stint, overtaking one team who pitted very late for their first stops and ended up having to pit again within the last 10 minutes of his stint, and doing an amazing move around the outside of P6 on the last lap. Round the outside. Yes! Oh, what a move, mate! Come on! That was beautiful! Securing a P6 finish with fastest lap. So thanks for watching. Shout out to these guys, and I'll see you guys next time.